Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all again for joining us today. My name is Allie Smith, and I'm Manager of Grassroots Advocacy here at Autism Speaks. I appreciate all of the time you all are taking out of your day to join us and hear from our esteemed panel of experts and advocates and parents. I'd like to thank you all for the advocacy you are already doing within your communities. I know many of you are part of our ambassador program or other grassroots network members. It's nice to see you all again. And for those of you who are new to advocacy and science and research, glad to have you joining us and welcome to the team. So before we get into the meat of why research matters, we did just want to raise a couple upcoming events for you as well. The first, on an advocacy note, is that we have a few other webinars planned related to advocacy around COVID-19 and the current environment around it. For more information on those, you can go to Autism Speaks Facebook page and look at their events, and you'll see which select states have specific webinars planned, and we'll continue to update the schedule on there. And then there's an organization-wide event happening this Saturday that you've probably seen already, but we want to flag for you. It's called Steps for Kindness. So Saturday at 1 p.m., we are recreating a virtual walk, essentially. We'll have an opening ceremony at 1 and then steps and send-off at 1:15, where we're challenging you to take 5,400 steps alone or as a family or as a team to help increase understanding and acceptance of the 1 in 54 U.S. children with autism. So you don't have to do 5,400 steps if you don't want to. The challenge of this is just doing something, taking one action to help make the world a more inclusive and kinder place for people with autism. So again, you can go to Autism Speaks Facebook page to RSVP to the live event that will be happening through Facebook Live on Saturday. And with that, I am going to pass this conversation off onto Stuart Spielman to tell us a little bit about what our speakers are going to share with us today and why does research matter.
Thanks, Allie. So I'm Stuart Spielman. Next slide, Allie, if you can. Particularly now, I am Zach's dad. And this is a picture that I just took actually about a week ago. Zach is 25, he's going to be 26. And in 1994, when Zach was born, NIH funded $11.7 million, less than $11.7 million in autism research. This year, the National Institutes of Health, which account for about 80% of federal funding of autism research, will spend an estimated $314 million. Next slide, Allie. Okay, so you can see the curve on how things have changed dramatically, and you can see that a lot of the increase aligns with enactment of legislation such as the Autism Cares Act in 2014 and its predecessor, the Combating Autism Act. So advocacy in no small measure has accounted for the dramatic increase in spending on autism research since the time Zach was born. The increase that we've seen, however, falls short of the recommendation of the Federal Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. In its 2016-2017 strategic plan, the IAC recommended doubling the 2015 combined federal and private autism research budget of $343 million to $685 million by 2020. So to sum things up, research spending is trending in the right direction, but there's still a way to go before the IAC's vision is realized. But why does this matter? Why should our community be passionate about research? We have a great panel to explore these questions, and I'm going to introduce each of the panelists now. and then the panelists will speak. So Tom Frazier is PhD, joined Autism Speaks in April 2017 as Chief Science Officer. He's responsible for the science portfolio, including grant making, the MSSNG Genomic Research Project, and the Autism Treatment Network. As a clinical psychologist, Dr. Frazier has been involved for 15 years in evaluation, treatment, and research focused on individuals with autism. Prior to joining Autism Speaks, Tom was the director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Autism and an assistant professor of pediatrics at the Cleveland Clinic Werner College of Medicine. Thanks, Tom, for joining us. Our next panelist is Beth Mallow, MD, MS, and Beth is in the very blue room, you can see. Beth is professor of neurology and pediatrics, director of the Vanderbilt Sleep Division, and she holds the Burry Endowed Chair in Cognitive Childhood Development and serves as vice chair for clinical research in the Department of Neurology and incoming director of the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center Clinical Translational Core. Dr. Mallow is board certified in neurology and sleep medicine. She is vice chair of the governor-appointed Tennessee Autism Council. Dr. Mallow serves as PI for the Vanderbilt site of the NeuroNext Network, which is an NINDS network of excellence in neuroscience clinical trials. She also serves as the principal investigator for Vanderbilt's Autism Treatment Network, which is one of 12 regional centers across North America developing standards of medical care for children with autism. Thanks, Beth, for joining us. I'm going to go on to our next panelist from Angelica Salinas. Angelica Salinas, MS-CRC, is Research Program Manager at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for Go Badgers for the Wisconsin Surveillance of Autism and Other Developmental Disability System, WISADS, which is part of the Autism Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network funded through the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. WISADS monitors the prevalence of autism spectrum disorders, cerebral palsy, and co-occurring intellectual disability in 8-year-old children within a 10-county area in southeastern Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us, Angelica. And now I'm going to go on to our final panelist. Musina L. Holmes-Morris, PhD, is the Academic Program Director and Assistant Professor of Chemistry at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Morris, who is from McDonough, Georgia, is a Georgia Volunteer Advocacy Ambassador for Autism Speaks. In conjunction with Morehouse's Makerspace Exploration Center, Dr. Morris 3D prints specialized laboratory equipment for those with autism. As the PI of the Morris Research and Innovation Group, her primary focus is to utilize technological tools to create inclusivity in STEM for those with ASD. She is the founder of Super Science Saturdays, whereby neurodiverse and neurotypical students come together to be immersed in science. She believes exposure is the key to eliminating the disparities in STEM for neurodiverse learners with ASD. So this is really a distinguished panel, and it's not just academically distinguished, but professionally distinguished as well by a common defining experience. Each member of the panel is the parent of a child or children on the autism spectrum. I'll ask the panel to draw on that experience for the rest of this program. I'm going to ask Tom to kick off the presentation to describe the work of Autism Speaks, our science, and how it affects the autism community. Tom?
Hey, Stuart, can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, great. And you guys can hear me okay? Hopefully.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Stuart. And before I get started, I just want to mention how lucky I think the autism community is to have Stuart and his team advocating for us every single day at the local, state, and federal level to make sure that research is a priority, because we know that research is the way forward. It's really our best tool in the toolbox for creating progress for autism and people affected by autism or people with autism. Stuart and I share a special kinship because his son and my son have very similar challenges and experiences. And we often talk about together, you know, on random Mondays and Tuesdays or whenever we get together about why research matters and how important it is to continue to push it forward and to continue to fund research. As I started to think about my role in today, I thought, well, one of the best ways to introduce the value of research is to not forget about all of the advances that we've already achieved. And those advances being largely driven by research in addition to awareness. And so, you know, when you think about some of the advances that Autism Speaks has played a unique role in, one of them is early diagnosis. And that early diagnosis came through not just because of increased awareness and marketing campaigns, but also because of our ability to identify early signs and symptoms. And a lot of that work came through the Baby Siblings Research Consortium, originally supported by Autism Speaks. It's not unusual for the folks on this call to remember a 9, 10, or older. The very first patient with autism I diagnosed clinically was 22 years old. So we now see that autism is frequently diagnosed at age 4 or earlier, and that's great news. We have timely interventions now, many of them behaviorally based interventions that can be delivered by parents, for example, parent-mediated interventions or parent training interventions, and then also direct interventions, some of which are very intense, like applied behavioral analysis, some of which are less intensely delivered and developmentally considered, like Early Start Denver model and pivotal response treatment. But we have these interventions now because we've invested in the research to show that they're effective and that they do change the trajectory of people with autism. And I can speak to that myself. My son has benefited tremendously from early intensive and now ongoing behavioral interventions. We now have a better sense of the co-occurring conditions around autism. Upwards of 90% of people with autism have some co-occurring medical or mental health condition. Many times, those of us that are a little older on this call will remember a time when those conditions were largely attributed to the person having autism, to the autistic person, rather than being seen as separate conditions that needed to be evaluated and treated. And our Autism Treatment Network, which is now our Autism Learning Health Network, played a huge role in understanding that and developing practice guidelines. And then lastly, Autism Speaks, as with the National Institute of Health and other organizations, has put a lot of research funding into just developing a basic understanding of autism, everything from genetics and neurobiology all the way up through understanding the core signs and symptoms and how we might be able to develop interventions for those. So I think, you know, when people ask you the question, why does research matter? I think we can easily point them to some of the major advances we've already achieved as one reason for why research matters. Of course, the other being that we have to make continued progress. We have to move forward. And one of the ways in which we hope to move forward in research at Autism Speaks and really in our overall influence on the autism research community is by developing personalized care models. And they're, you know, personalization or individualization of care is sort of a buzzword now, but it's really important to understand what we mean by this. And one of the things that we mean by this term is that in order to really truly personalize care, we have to understand the individual. And one of the best ways to understand that individual is to understand their biology, their unique biology, and what parts of that biology contributed to their autism. And then after we understand, we can look for and try to translate that understanding into potential solutions, and then we can test those solutions. And so Autism Speaks is very lucky to have programs like our Autism Genetic Resource Exchange, our Missing Genetic Program, our PACT program, which looks at translating new therapeutics, and our Autism Learning Health Network that can actually facilitate the development of these personalized care models. And as I mentioned, our Autism Genetic Resource Exchange and our Missing Project have been extremely successful genetic programs focused around trying to understand the biology of autism. And we now have more than 80 autism or neurodevelopmental disorder linked genes, and we should be proud of that progress, because that is the first step along the pathway of understanding the biology of autism and being able to develop really individualized care so that we can address those co-occurring conditions and we can really maximize functioning in people with autism. I mentioned our PAC program, and I won't go into detail, but this is really a mechanism for us to take those biological learnings, those biological understandings, and translate them into therapeutics. And we've been inviting biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies to participate with us in that process, because we want to be able to leverage existing medicines as well as new therapeutics and try to test and see if these are safe and effective ways to improve the lives of people with autism, autistic people. And then, of course, Dr. Mallow can talk much more about our Autism Learning Health Network and the work that she's done in that network. But this network is crucially important to the future of autism, because it allows us to, through standard clinical visits, to collect the key information we need to know about people with autism and store that in a database, and then evaluate that data consistently over time, and then institute new procedures so that we can do an even better job of evaluating and intervening for people with autism. And we also have a global autism public health program that we're very proud of. It has more than 30 active field testing sites, and has influenced autism care in more than 30 countries now around the world, but also has sites in the US, including Newark, Missouri, and New Jersey, and the Chinese immigrant community in New York City. So we're really excited about their continued work. They've been pushing forward our Caregiver Skills Training program, which is a scalable model for helping caregivers to provide the best care that they can for their children with autism. And our program in public health is also focused on data science and understanding all of the disparities, including the health disparities that people with autism face. And again, that's really important work, because it allows Stuart and his team to go to government agencies and talk about the health disparities and the reasons why we need research funding to move that forward. And then I just want to mention that while we're focusing on developing new personalized interventions and supports, we can't forget that people with autism and their families need help now. And so we're focusing on near-term solutions as well. Our public health program is doing that. Our Autism Learning Health Network is doing that. And we have also used our grants program to fund projects that are specifically focused on research that will produce near-term solutions that can make a huge difference for autism-affected individuals and families. And our fellowship program is something we're extremely proud of, because we believe strongly that we have to seed the future of autism research. We have to identify early career individuals that can make a huge difference with new paradigms and new methodologies, new ways of approaching autism, so that we can better understand and develop the most effective ways of intervening. And I'll also mention that a lot of us as individual researchers are doing work in a hot area around biomarkers, with the idea being that if we can come up with biomarkers for autism, that we can identify autism earlier, we can track progress better, we can get interventions in place as early as possible to make the biggest difference in a positive trajectory for people with autism. And this is just some of my own work in using gaze and remote eye gaze tracking, which is easy to do even with young individuals with autism, because they just look at a computer screen while we track their gaze and they watch fun movies. And by using this, we can actually see that people with autism do look differently, and then we can combine that information together to identify folks earlier, and then measure their autism symptom levels, but also track other things like their receptive language and other cognitive functions that can be useful for developing treatment plans. So overall, I just want to leave people with the idea that science really improves lives, and that's why research matters, and that other areas of science have shown that biology can lead us to personalized interventions and supports. And yet at the same time, we can't forget about the needs of autistic people and their families in the near term, and we have to continue to support applied research for that. And I hope that Stuart and his team can continue to push forward research funding at the federal level and really at all levels, because with additional funding, I think autism science can incorporate some of these new technologies, new biomarkers that are coming along. We can identify these personalized interventions and supports and medicines, and we can also provide very scalable supports at home, in schools, and in community settings. And I'll just mention for anybody on the line who's more advocacy focused, that if we do these things, that this can actually be a very cost-effective thing for society. That in fact, the incremental cost of autism, which we estimate to be between $1.4 and $2.3 million per person across the lifespan, actually can be reduced by significant amounts. We have a paper under review showing that maybe we can reduce these by around $600,000 per person across the lifespan, just by instituting early effective interventions and identifying people as early as possible. So I'll leave you with that, and I hope that people can see not only our passion at Autism Speaks for the research and the science, but also the great work that our advocacy team is doing to bring the dollars that we need to do that research.
So Tom, thanks so much for your presentation. You actually addressed questions that I was planning on asking you. There is going to be a Q&A at the very end, and I and others may ask you questions, but thanks for talking about why research funding matters and what additional funding could bring us in the way of benefits. Beth, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to talk about your work.
Wonderful. Let me just get my slides up. Let's see, share screen. And here we go. Okay. Can the panelists see my screen?
Yes, it's coming through.
Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, so thank you for that great introduction, Tom. I'm going to actually talk about a study that is funded by ATN AIRP, which is our research arm in the ATN. And when we designed it and it was funded last year, we did not anticipate COVID. None of us did, but it's entirely online, so families can participate from their homes. So that's why I've titled this as Perfect for COVID-19. It really is exciting to do a totally online study. So let me tell you what we've been doing. Oh, and I should back up. These are my kids when they were younger, and now they're both in college. And they are, the backdrop is Washington, D.C. and the Capitol, because they went around with Stuart and me to do some advocacy visits I think it was 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago. So that was very exciting for them. And they're both on the spectrum. So this is an online sleep education study, and it involves parents of 100 children ages 2 to 10 years who have been diagnosed with autism. We use a community diagnosis. We use DSM criteria. And we just completed our enrollment, although we're right now in the process of continuing the collection measures. Parents report either sleep onset delay, night wakings, or bedtime resistance, and they're phone screened by study coordinators. So everything's on the phone, and then they participate using an online parent portal, which I'll show you in a moment. If they qualify based on the phone screening, they provide electronic consent, or we call it e-consent, through this phone portal, this parent portal. And the portal allows families to unlock surveys after they provide consent. And then after they do their first baseline survey set, they get the educational materials. And they're either randomized to a basic pamphlet on sleep or full materials, which include videos. And then they complete surveys several weeks later, and everything they do, whether it's the completion of the surveys or the viewing of the materials, is tracked by the program so that we can see who's completed their surveys, who needs reminders, and also how actively they've been viewing the materials that are provided. So this is what actually, let me go to my slideshow from current slides. So this is what the sleep toolkit looks like for parents. They go to a link on their phone and it takes them to a secure website and they'll see this portal. And the first thing they do is click on the informed consent, and I'll show you that in a moment. But once they fill that out, they get access to these baseline surveys. So then they do that all on their phones or on their laptops or iPads or whatever. And then once they complete the baseline, they get access to these documents. And you'll see if they're just randomized to the sleep pamphlet, they get the sleep pamphlet. If they're randomized to everything, then they get, they get them in Spanish as well, the pamphlet, and then if they're randomized to everything, quick tips, and the quick tips are kind of one-pagers on bedtime pass, children with limited skills, limited verbal skills, visual schedules, and then they also get access to these videos. And this is what the pamphlet looks like, the ATN pamphlet looks like. This is what the informed consent document looks like. It looks like a regular informed consent that you would do in person, but what's nice about e-consent or electronic consent, they can do it all on their online. They can provide an electronic signature, and we can even embed videos and other things into here to make it easier for them to understand research. And then we have a parent feedback form at the end of the study that allows them to provide feedback on the study and how it went for them. What did they find useful? What were some of the challenges? And the parents have given us really nice feedback on the study. They've said it's easy. They like that they can do it in their homes. It's very kind of family friendly to them. Even before COVID, we got those, but even, now in the midst of everybody being at home, they really appreciate that they can do the study online. And we haven't been able to have to put the study on hold because it's a continuous, online study. So we've been very happy about that. And these are some of the resources that I just wanted to highlight have been developed by Autism Speaks and the ATN, not just for the children. And these are some of these quick tips, these bedtime passes and visuals are some of the tools they have access to. We also have something for teens. We also have something on melatonin. So we're very grateful to Autism Speaks for supporting these resources. And through the parent portal, they're now in one place for the study. And then when the study ends, we'll make that parent portal and site available to all families throughout the network and throughout Autism Speaks. So I'll just stop there and say that things have gone very well with the study. We actually exceeded our enrolled and randomized close to 140 families, and we're waiting to analyze the data until everybody completes everything, which will happen end of May, beginning of June. But we're excited. We should have some results to share with the community. Can you hear me?
Beth?
Yes, I think we had a little lapse in communication there for a moment. Did everybody hear the end, or did you lose me at some point?
Yeah, I think we lost you. Why don't you repeat the very end?
Oh, sure. So I was just saying that we have exceeded our enrollment. I think because it is, an online study, it's been really easy for families. So we have now randomized a total of 140 families, and they're going through the last stages of the collection. And we hope to have data ready to share with the autism community this summer.
So Beth, if you don't mind, I'll ask you a couple of questions. And one question I think is fairly obvious, and that is, why does sleep matter? And you can all answer that question based on personal experience, but my hunch is you have a lot more data than personal experience, and you can discuss why sleep matters at night and why sleep matters during the day.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Stuart. So sleep in and of itself promotes health and well-being in children, regardless of whether they have autism or not. But if they have autism, it also improves their daytime functioning and quality of life and how they feel. And it also impacts positively on the whole family. So, if a child isn't sleeping well at night, it affects the whole family. They're up at night, they're sleep deprived, they're not going to be able to be as as supportive and empowering as they can be if their child is sleeping better. And we also know that our moods, we all know how we feel when we don't sleep. So when our kids don't sleep, we know it can affect their mood, their irritability, how they function in therapy. So when you have a well-rested child, you have a well-rested family, and you have a child who's ready to, take on ABA and therapy and be more engaged and involved.
So one last question. I think you're measuring parental sense of competence, and how do you think that might change for participants in the study?
Yeah, so we're measuring family inventory of sleep habits, child sleep, and also parenting sense of competence. And what we're finding so far, I've peeked at the data a little bit, is parents who really feel like, like they're accessing the materials and they're feeling like they're making a big difference, whether they're looking at the pamphlet or they're looking at everything, including the videos. I think it really enhances their sense of what they're doing as parents, that they feel like they're involved, engaged, an active participant in their child's sleep. And that, I think is going to translate into a higher degree of feeling good about their role as parents.
Thanks, Beth. I'm sure we're going to have more questions at the end, but I'd like to turn now to my fellow Wisconsinite, Angelica. I went to the University of Wisconsin a few years ago, and have good memories of Madison. And Angelica, if you can take over and present, we'd love to hear about your work.
Sure, thank you. Let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, so again, my name is Angelica Salinas. I am the project coordinator for the WISADS team at the Weizmann Center. I am also a parent of a 17-year-old child, well, teenager now, right, that was diagnosed with autism. I was a young mom. I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant, and my son Marco was 3 years old when he was a little over, like 3 years and a couple months old when he was officially diagnosed at the Weizmann Center with autism. At the time of the diagnosis, I had no idea what autism was. I found out about it through my own personal counseling that I was going to at the time, and she suggested it. So since my son was diagnosed, it's been a battle to advocate appropriately for services that he should have gotten. I learned more about autism through exploring a lot of the programs. I was on welfare at the time. We went through birth to 3 services. He had speech therapy. Once he got into elementary school, he did so well in kindergarten that after kindergarten, they decided that he no longer qualified for special education. And it became a very long, frustrating process because he still did qualify. His diagnosis didn't disappear. And so it wasn't until he was ending his 6th grade year in middle school that teachers brought up concerns, and I was finally, I guess, listened to at the time, and that's where they were able to then give him the special education services that he needed. Now he is a junior in high school, and we're starting to work on transition plans. And I do not have a photo of him because he hates photos. I think I can, every year on his birthday, I can manage to get one, but you know, his facial expressions don't match what I would like, but you know, that's a whole nother story. So the WSADs, we are a prevalence, let me see if I can minimize this. We are a one of the ATOM sites. So we're one of 10 sites across the United States that's funded by the CDC to monitor the prevalence of ASDs and other developmental disabilities. We are currently conducting surveillance for 2018, and we are in 8 counties of southeastern Wisconsin. And you can see at the bottom corner, I have highlighted our counties that we are currently in. This is a map that I took off of the CDC website, and it just shows which states and sites are participating in the surveillance work. So the purple stars are tracking children 4 and 8-year-old children with autism, and the blue stars are not only looking at 4 and 8-year-olds, but for the first time are conducting follow-up of 16-year-olds. So these are kids that were previously looked at in another surveillance year, and now we're looking to see how have they fared over these last 8 years. Wisconsin is one of 5 sites that is conducting this work, and we're really excited, especially given my son is about the, you know, the age he's transitioning. It will be exciting to see what the results tell us on the information that we're collecting and how that can be applied to the work that we're all doing. So how do we kind of decide which children we look at? So records of 4 and 8-year-old children are first identified. We work with our sources, and we send them a list of ICD-9 and ICD-10 billing codes. And with schools, we go based off of their special education exceptionality. So the diagnosis that they're getting services for in special education. We also look at the child's birth year to make sure that that matches. Our team of abstractors then conduct review of these records in health education sources and other service providers, and they're following a strict CDC protocol that they've developed. In the end, we confirm that the parent or guardian of that child is residing in the surveillance area during the surveillance year. So that's really important to make sure that we're capturing the accurate number of kids that were in that area for the year. So once all the sites kind of have all their data, they send it to CDC, and then a few years later, there's about a 4-year lag. CDC then announces, as they recently did, our newest 2016 data was just released, and this was the headline from CDC, was the press release. We also had other sources that jumped on right away and were excited to share our new findings. So we had the Associated Press, Autism Speaks, Autism Society, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the headlines are exciting, I think, by all of us that are following this, that have families, that have a personal connection to somebody with autism. So our prevalence continues to increase. That's true for our overall ATOM pool data, and that's true for our Wisconsin specific data. There's also headlines about racial gaps closing between Black and white children. And so that's all very interesting. And so here's a side-by-side comparison of our 2016 ATOM data. So overall, on the left is the ATOM network data, and then our Wisconsin specific WSADs data. If you look at both of it, it looks pretty similar. There aren't too many differences. But the one that, I guess the area that touches me based on my own personal experience and getting services for my son is, while the overall gap between Black children and white children closed or is no longer, you can't tell the difference with the pool data, there still is a gap in the ATOM network data of white and Black children are now 1.2 times more likely to be identified with ASD than Hispanic children. And in Wisconsin, we're seeing that there's still a gap for Black children and Hispanic children. So Black children or white children are 1.2 more times more likely to be identified with ASD, and then for Hispanic, it's 1.1. And this is so important because as I was going through getting services for my son, I spoke English, but I have a lot of family members that either know somebody or their own children have diagnosis and they don't speak the language and they aren't attuned to how we do healthcare here in the United States. They don't feel comfortable asking questions. They don't know who to go to. They don't, they do not understand what autism is. And so there's a lot of barriers that are still happening. And so while it's wonderful to see, and again, this is my own personal opinion, it's wonderful to see that, you know, overall we're seeing gaps close. There's still a lot of work to be done in these areas. And it's really important that we continue the surveillance work that we're doing as an ATOM site and other organizations that are also conducting surveillance on this as well. On the last panel that I was on for Autism Speaks, there was a lot of families that spoke to rural versus urban and the services, how those can be different for families depending on where they reside. And I wanted to pull numbers, but you know, given our surveillance area, we're predominantly urban in nature. And this was just a map. This was the clearest map I could find that kind of depicted that for us. This is from the Department of Natural Resources. I also looked at the US Census. And so they pretty much, depending on how you define it, you're going to get a little bit of differences in the maps, but we're predominantly urban. And so what does that say for all of our rural areas that we don't have data on, and we don't know what those prevalence numbers look like in those areas? So this is I guess a part of the work that I feel we should expand on to see what that looks like. And ideally, you know, we could be doing surveillance on our entire state. And, you know, we're looking at ways on how to do that. And so hopefully in the next few years, we'll be able to share numbers with you that accurately describe our state as a whole. So why does this matter? The prevalence of ASD varies between sites. And like I said, our gaps still exist. More work needs to be done to identify ASD early, to ensure early identification is equitable for everybody. And when I say equitable, I mean we need to eliminate barriers for everybody. So whether that's a language barrier or that is a barrier due to poverty, lack of health insurance, there's so many barriers that families face. And to ensure that we are able to do early identification for our underserved populations, we need to explore what that would look like more for everyone. And then how can we use this data? You can use the data however best it would be to inform the work that you're doing, whether that's early identification, outreach with families, increasing awareness, developing policies to support your work. Another idea is to partner with our ATOM sites. If you work for an organization, a health organization, an educational organization, and you feel like a partner with the work that we're doing surveillance would be beneficial to your community, contact us. Our information is on the CDC website. In Wisconsin, we are continuously looking to collaborate with more education sources. And so it's hard to make those connections when you don't have an inside person. And so if you are in one of those situations and you want to be a part of our work, reach out to the PI, to the project coordinator, and start those conversations with them. And then lastly, share information, the data that you're gathering, share it with families, keep them up to speed, keep them informed, because they do want to know. I wanted to know, I didn't know how to ask on, I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know how to ask it. And I didn't feel respected much of the time during the process of getting services for my son. So sharing that information with families is so important. You don't know what, I guess, how you can empower families. After my son was diagnosed, that was both my undergrad and graduate degree are in rehabilitation psychology. And so that was what pushed me, is that I wanted to find out how to work with adults with disabilities and to learn more about how I could help my son in the future. And lastly, there are just some links here related to the ADAM network. So for 4 and 8-year-olds, and the CDC press release, our community report and state pages, and then the CDC's website that now takes data from 4 different agencies, and you can play around with that. It's a fun interactive tool to try to get the data that you're looking for. I just want to say thank you so much, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My information is at the bottom of the screen.
So thank you, Angelica. I know someone has a hand raised, but we'll save the questions for the end. I want to go on to Yusina, who's in bright blue. And thank you, Yusina, for joining us. The stage is yours. You're on mute.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to just share my screen here for us. Let's see, is it? There we go. Okay, hi everyone. I am Messina Morris, and I am the Academic Program Director of Chemistry, as well as an Assistant Professor of Chemistry at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. I reside about 25 miles south of the city in McDonough, Georgia. I am a mother, a wife, a mother of 5 boys, and I also am a caretaker of my mother-in-law who has dementia. So I have a full plate. But I am an advocate for the state of Georgia, for Autism Speaks, and I want to speak a little bit about autism advocacy research in the future and why that's important. So my experience, I am an Autism Speaks advocacy ambassador. I am a chemistry fellow with the American Chemical Society, where I incorporate active learning tools into the college classroom. I am an educator, so I'm K-12 certified. I'm also a professor, so I have been in higher ed for nearly a decade too. I am the mom of 5 boys, Anthony, Matthew, Christopher, Seth, and Cameron. My younger 2 boys, Seth and Cameron, have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I'm also a sibling to a special needs brother by the name of Gordy, who had a traumatic brain injury due to spinal meningitis. And so I was raised with a lot of awareness that there were special people in the world who needed our empathy, our support, and our love. And he drove me into wanting to pursue research at a different level. But this is my family. So that's Cameron and my husband, Chris. That's Seth and Matthew, Christopher, my mother-in-law, Nina, and my oldest son, Anthony. And really, my journey started when Seth, who is now age 12, who is here, was diagnosed with autism when he was 3 years old. And I wondered at the time, I was a high school teacher, but also a chemistry teacher, and I had studied brain chemistry while in graduate school. I got my PhD from Emory University in biomolecular chemistry, and I studied dopamine transporter protein, and so a lot of different neurotransmitters and things like that. And so I was wondering, how could I utilize everything I knew to help my child? So the convergence of my life was, I was very frustrated. I live in a small town that is south of the city, not a lot of resources available for those who are on the spectrum. And so I had to figure out what my game plan was to help Seth at the time. And I had to identify my autism angst. And that was that there were not a lot of opportunities. And after beating my head up against the wall, trying to figure out how I was going to run him north of the city to find these resources, or how much money I was going to have to spend, and I already had a large family. What could I do what was already in my toolkit that I could use to help him? So I had to identify what my angst was, and it was really lack of opportunities, not just currently, but now for the future. And how I created those opportunities. So I used my personal research experience that I already had in biomolecular chemistry and neurochemistry, and my passion for tangible solutions. So I really believe that there is a solution here, and research is the best way to inform some of these decisions that we are making. And so I looked at the statistical data, and that for me really helped me to create a different type of opportunity for not just my child, but other children and others on the spectrum. And so I created my research program around what I call STEAAM-HITS. So STEAM-HITS standing for science, technology, engineering, arts, agriculture, mathematics. And then the HITS part is helping inclusivity through technological solutions. So the Morris Research and Innovation Group that I have at Morehouse College basically studies all types of technological tools and innovations to be able to help those who on the spectrum access STEAM, basically. So about my angst. So there were so many opportunities that were lacking, and everyone's seen this slide here, this picture of the estimated autism prevalence that was put out. And as of 2020, the number 1 in 54 is very meaningful. When my son was first diagnosed, the number was 1 in 68. Actually, it was 1 in 88. I apologize. And then it has steadily become more significant, and more people being diagnosed, which is good. And it's also, it raises a lot of questions as to what we can continue to do to provide opportunities for our children on the spectrum. And so as I thought about the future of autism in my child, then I had to think about how could I create a way to fill these gaps. And so I knew that autism was expensive. It's a lifelong diagnosis. Most people on the spectrum will outlive their caregivers. And so then what does that look like? And I could just see a huge economic impact, burdening taxpayers and people if we did not provide some type of self-sufficiency for those who are on the spectrum. And I feel like those who are on the spectrum have more talents and gifts than they are given credit for having. And so I wanted to utilize my expertise to bring forth some of those gifts in the area of STEM. And so then how did those gaps start being filled for me is how did I use my personal arsenal of talents to really create opportunities. And so Autism Speaks gave me a wonderful opportunity to be able to utilize my talents and all of my expertise. And so I started really engaging with Autism Speaks as an organization. One, they gave me an opportunity to create programs. So there weren't a lot of summer camps available, and the Baker scholarship program was available. And so I wrote a grant along with an urban farm called Truly Living Well. And we put on a preview camp, World of Wonder, and Autism Speaks allowed me to be able to do that. So I was able to use my research acumen and my creativity to provide an opportunity on the south side of town for my son to partake in. So we participated in Autism Speaks walks, always as Seth Soldiers. So this is our logo for 2019 for Seth, obviously, I think this one is 1 in 59, but now we know it's 1 in 54, so we'll be changing up that logo for the next walk. But that led to me being a member of the grant review committee and the advocacy ambassador. And then at the same time, I was still a professor of chemistry. And so I wanted to do a little bit more. And so Morehouse has a makerspace. And in that makerspace, you can do a lot of different and wonderful things in the area of making. So I was just thinking about the courses that I teach and started to infuse into my curriculum in my analytical chemistry classroom was the 3D printing of specialized lab equipment. And so students were able to create lab equipment and tools for uses in lab so that they could help understand a little bit more how to be more empathetic towards others, as well as how did we derive these quantitative containers to begin with. And it just exploded into this research group because everyone was so interested in trying to develop tools for those who are on the spectrum. And so as the Morris Research and Innovation Group at Morehouse, we basically research, develop, and design innovative technological solutions for those with ASD. And all of this is, like I said, themed in my STEAAM-HITS initiative. And so what I found out as I was doing the research and creating these tools was that 30% of the college students on the spectrum actually major in STEM. So 30% of students who enter college and have ASD actually are STEM majors. And regardless of the fact that they get those degrees, even after high school or even after college, then the unemployment rate has not changed. So it doesn't depend on education level. The autism, the unemployment rate for those on the spectrum is 85%. And that was so puzzling to me. And what it says is we've done a great job of awareness, but we still need more advocacy, but we also need employers and other tools in the workplace to be able to accommodate those who are on the spectrum. And so that, coupled with the autism prevalence being what it is, and understanding that 44% of people with ASD have average to above average intellectual ability, all of those things kind of became so statistically significant for me that I adopted the hashtag statistically significant, because I knew that all of these things weren't like a coincidence. It was, these were real numbers and real stats, and it was really affecting our community. And so we've done a great job of identifying those who are on the spectrum at earlier ages and being able to implement early intervention. But what we still have work to do is how can we get those who are now aware to also accommodate those who are on the spectrum, and to do more than just place them as greeters and or janitorial services, but that they can access a little bit more technical, they have more technical skill than we actually give them credit for, and with the proper training, with the proper supports in place, that they could also have careers in STEAM. And so how did this research inform my choices as a parent, as an advocate, as a researcher? Tapping into what Autism Speaks already has with the Autism Treatment Network, I think that they provide real-time, relevant information for those who are in the medical profession, as well as parents, to be able to access. And so the Autism Treatment Network is a wonderful network. It's 12 sites across the country. It's a collaborative effort between hospitals and with a lot of researchers, and they provide basically this personalized kind of care for our children with autism. But more than that, they develop evidence-based protocols protocols, and they share their best practices. So this will help improve the outcomes for all children and all people on the spectrum. And I thought that it was so necessary because autism isn't just one-dimensional. Our children have different other comorbid disorders that kind of, or disease that go alongside with them having autism. And so sleep disorders and ADHD and gastrointestinal dysfunction and sensory processing disorders and all of those things kind of go with it. And it's important that we have this network to tap into. And so research matters because it is providing an opportunity for us to learn more about how to care for those who are on the spectrum throughout their entire life. As I stated before, research is important more than anything because autism is statistically significant. That means it is not the result of some chance. This research can help us make informed choices for treatment of those with ASD, that research can alleviate future economic impact to families as well as communities, and can create opportunities for self-sufficiency over a lifetime for our kids. And research matters because autism prevalence is rising, which means that it is statistically significant. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. And you can contact me. My email address is below, telephone number, and you can follow me at Chemistry on Instagram.
Thank you, Ms. Anna. I was going to ask the panelists how autism has affected their approach towards science, but Yesenia, you and Beth and Angelica and Tom have already done that. So I'm going to jump ahead to the topic of the moment, which is, of course, COVID. And I'm going to ask Tom and to talk about what we know in COVID, and I would invite the other panelists if they want to add anything about what we've learned about the community and how COVID is affecting the community. But I'm going to go to Tom first, and again, welcome input from any of the panelists. Tom? You're on mute, by the way, Tom.
Hey, Stuart, thank you. Sorry, I was muted. And I'm just going to be giving a little bit of factual information, so definitely the panelists should chime in. I'm going to walk through it really quickly because none of it's super groundbreaking. I mean, we're all living this right now, so there's not much I can say that would surprise anybody. But the CDC has come out and stated that people with autism are at greater risk for serious complications, predominantly because of the higher rates of co-occurring health conditions that affect some folks with autism, particularly those related to heart and lung function. So this makes autism a high-risk group. And we also know that many people with autism have underlying genetic conditions, and that also can increase risk. And of course, we see that the communication challenges in autism oftentimes mean that at least some people with autism struggle with reporting their symptoms and following hygiene protocols. And this is another challenge that we're facing. Some autistic teens and adults are in group facilities, and we know that these facilities are at very high risk for exposure. So the autism group, the autism population really is at a significantly increased risk here. And we are seeing a rapid spread of COVID-19 among communities of people with disabilities. So obviously this is top of mind for all of us. The Simons Foundation Spark study did a nice survey of caregivers. More than 8,000 families completed the survey. And what they found, I think, isn't super surprising, but it's useful to see the numbers. First of all, many people are reporting disruptions in services, particularly speech therapy, and it's affecting obviously school and clinic settings, but also home-based therapies. And many caregivers have reported here that they're trying to rely on telehealth services to compensate. 35% are receiving some remote services or therapies, but only 43% are reporting benefiting moderately to significantly from these services. So there's obviously a gap in services that's being created. And while a lot of people are feeling well overall, and individuals with autism are feeling well overall, caregivers are reporting that this is negatively impacting the child's mental health and their behavior. Not surprising to those of us that have kids at home right now, but it's good to see that we're not alone and that this is a common issue that we've got to start dealing with and addressing. And even though a lot of our parents and guardians are feeling good overall, many, more than 95%, are reporting feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and that it's impacted their mental health. So, this is a big deal, and we've known that challenging behaviors are a major issue in autism overall because our Autism Treatment Network has pointed out that many challenging behaviors are reported by families, with 85% of caregivers reporting moderate to extreme severity of at least one challenging behavior. So at Autism Speaks, we've formed an autism researcher task force, and I have to give a shout out to Dr. Andy Shear, who has just led this work and really put a group of researchers together to vet evidence-informed resources that we want to offer free to families and service providers. We want to offer these to the community and share as globally as possible, particularly for low resource and underserved communities, but we are all feeling that way now. And we just sent out an initial call this week for resources, and you can start to find these on the Autism Speaks COVID-19 resources information page. And we're looking for video courses on evidence-based strategies, webinars, toolkits, teaching stories, and also visual aids and communication supports. And again, we want to make these available to everybody on the resource and information page. So keep an eye out for that. Start checking the page. We're going to be vetting these resources, and we're really excited but also grateful to be able to do this for the community. And researchers have really stepped up and are excited to contribute to this project. So thanks, Stuart, and I definitely want to open it up to the other panelists.
Yeah, please. Love to hear how things are going in your communities. Musina, Angelica, Beth, you represent some geographically separate communities, all east of the Mississippi River, but still a pretty wide swath of territory from Georgia to Wisconsin.
So I'll go ahead and go first. So in Georgia, particularly in my situation, so I have Seth, who is 12 and in elementary school still, but there has been a disruption in services, speech and OT non-existent. So some OT I do at home because I am able to provide some of those therapies as the parent, but it's been increasingly difficult, and I've spoken to other parents in different support groups, and I'm a part of a national support group for autism moms too, and we're all kind of struggling. It's difficult because they're doing remote learning, and so our children are supposed to sit in, I know like they like the computer, but they like the computer to do what they want to do, but not necessarily to sit and have a teacher lecturing or sharing their screen and guiding them through a lesson. And so it's really been challenging to try to work through this environment, as well as have kind of be that facilitator of learning with a child on the spectrum. And so for me, I've just tried not to think too highly of myself. I mean, I'm an educator, but I've been trying not to put too much pressure on myself that it's going to be perfect and that he's going to, log in and want to participate every time. And so I've lowered the expectation that I have for myself to be like this kind of model citizen educator, because you just kind of have to. And then Seth has some underlying health issues that he's been dealing with recently, intracranial hypertension. And so he had been in and out of the hospital over the last few months. And so medication adjustments and just all the appointments that we've had to try to convert to telehealth appointments it's been a really, really difficult time, and having a large family already, I do my best just to keep my head above water. And I was so glad to see Beth talking about sleep, because he has no kind of concept. His sleep is so off. I mean, he is sometimes up all night and then sleeping some parts of the day, but then there was one little spell he went 36 hours without sleeping. It's been really, really challenging for him, even trying to maintain a schedule, which we normally do. And then there's a lot of people in the house, and there's a lot going on. And so he's probably on sensory overload most of the time. But I think that through this climate, the thing is to keep us all indoors and healthy and well. And, you know, at the end of the day, if everyone is fed and everyone is, you know, not ill or, you know, suffering, then I'm okay. But I've also noticed with my college students, I have some students that are also on the spectrum, and they've struggled in this environment a whole lot. And so I try to do one-on-one Zoom calls with them and just let them know that, you know, they have, their accommodations are good with me, and if they need a little more time, then they have that. But just trying to remain empathetic to the needs of those who have different challenges, and even different challenges at home, because not everyone has a designated space where they can study and that they can, you know, be alone, and they're sharing Wi-Fi and they're sharing computers and those kind of things. And so just trying not to put the pressures that we want to put on ourselves. I mean, and using this as a time to rest and kind of recuperate and rejuvenate ourselves too. So that's what's going on in Georgia.
Thank you. Beth, you have your hand up, but you're on mute.
Yeah, I wanted to say, first of all, I appreciate the words about sleep. I've been, as a clinician, able to do my telehealth visits or telesleep visits actually from the room you're seeing me in now, and I have absolutely loved it. And I think the families have too, because the kids aren't as scared. Like, they know I'm not going to give them a shot, and you know, they can show me their dogs and their cats and their birds and their lizards, and everybody just seems so relaxed. The parents don't have to worry about a parking spot or fighting the traffic. Now, it's not for every family. I mean, you saw where my internet lapsed, and if you don't have great internet, it can be a challenge. But for the families who can do it, I think telehealth, I'm hoping we won't go back to the way it was. I'm hoping we can continue to do telehealth, because I think these video visits are so helpful for so many families, including those on the spectrum. So I just wanted to, you know, put in a plug for that, and mention to you all in the audience that, you know, check in with your healthcare system, because maybe your providers can do telehealth. A lot of insurance companies are waiving the requirement to face-to-face visits and allowing for telehealth visits right now. So check in with your providers and see if you can do a telehealth visit during this this difficult time.
Thank you, Beth. Angelica, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so the COVID-19 hasn't really affected the work that we're doing at WSADS. It's delayed some of the access to sources that we've been able to access, but we still think that, well, I guess we're optimistic that it will clear up and we will be able to finish out our surveillance year on time. Personally, you know, I hear Dr. Morris talking, and, you know, it's been a challenge. My son has said that he has enjoyed shorter days, but it's still a challenge. The first check-in with his caseworker at school, he was in a Zoom waiting area for 30 minutes. He had assured me that he had it under control. It wasn't until I received a phone call from his case manager saying that she was going to log off within the next 10 minutes if she didn't hear from him. So that I went to check on him, and he was like, well, he was logged on. He was just sitting in front of his computer, staring at it, waiting for somebody to magically appear. And, you know, he didn't have those, he didn't know how to contact, or that he should contact, or what to do. He didn't even know to come tell me that he was kind of stuck and needed help. So it's been a change. There's a lot of transition. You know, he has his routine when he, you know, he does academically, he does very well. He's one of those kids that he likes routine. He goes about his day, and this has kind of thrown everything off. And so he's up at all hours of the night. And again, I also enjoyed hearing about sleep, because we've always struggled with sleep. He has slept with a light on in his room ever since he was little. And I just think about the impact of that in his sleep. And just everything is thrown off. The Weizmann Center has put together a resource page for families, and I'm actually just going to send it in the link to all the panelists.
Angelica, you've gone on mute.
Sorry, I tried to hit enter. It has a lot of really great resources. I'm just going to send the link to all the panelists. It has different topic areas for people with disabilities, for families, different Wisconsin resources, and just a really great page to just look around and see if you can get any tips off of there for your own communities.
Thank you. We have a little less than 10 minutes left, and Kelly Hedrick, who is our Senior Director for State Government Affairs and Grassroots Advocacy, has been monitoring for questions, and so we have a little time to take some questions. Kelly, you want to queue up some questions?
Thanks. Thank you, Stuart. We have a few good questions and comments, and of those that have not been addressed already, Richard asked, and I think this is probably best to go to Tom, but other researchers certainly feel free to weigh in as well. Has there been any emphasis on exploring environmental or other external factors, so non-genetic, that may have ties to autism?
Yeah, absolutely. And Autism Speaks has supported a lot of the work in looking at environmental factors. So over the years, we've supported studies that have looked at all kinds of different exposures, as well as studies on aging in parents. And there have been a number of really good studies recently that have looked at things like lead exposure and some other heavy metal exposures, some of which actually are protective factors, and some of which, like lead, are general risk factors for neurodevelopmental problems. So yeah, absolutely. And in fact, our genetics program, the Missing project that Stuart mentioned that I showed a slide on, actually is starting to look at collecting more rigorously some environmental information as well. So we can not only look at genetics and environment, but we can also look at gene-environment interactions. And so, yeah, that's a major area of study. We want to continue to look at it. We think that gene-environment interaction in particular is going to be important.
Great, thank you, Tom. I have one question that's by phone. The person is only on phone, so I'm going to unmute just them and ask them to share their question if they're still wanting to do that. Area code 305, we can hear you now. You still have a question from the phone, area code 305? Okay, I will go on to a good comment from Tanya. I think it's important to also mention that the data shows that Black and Hispanic children are still getting evaluated and diagnosed later than white children. This is important for public health and health communications, absolutely. And I know that Autism Speaks has a number of efforts to try to continue to close that gap. We have a question. I think this might be best for Stuart or Dave. On the initial graph of NIH funding, there was a spike in 2010 and then a dip until 2015. What happened, and what can we do as advocates and other interested people to help with research funding advocacy?
So we saw a spike in funding around 2009, I believe, 2009, 2010, related to economic stimulus for the recession. We have seen overall growth, but that growth to all of us isn't enough. And what I think we need to do as a community is to impress upon people that that the investments that are made in studies, whether those studies are genetic studies that can help provide some information about our children, whether our children might be more susceptible to a seizure disorder, let's say, or there are studies about sleep that can help us in our daily lives, or there are studies that go to prevalence, so we understand how many people are affected by autism, and we collect data from more sites in Wisconsin, more sites nationally, and we can also do things like understand learners better, understand the kinds of students that Musina deals with. How do we make those kids succeed, and not just succeed in the classroom, but succeed after they leave Musina's classroom? This is what advocacy and research is all about, and it's not one thing; it's all of these things. So we're going to continually work to increase the funding dollars. And Dave, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I said. Dave, you can introduce yourself first of all.
Hey everybody, Dave Sikowski. I'm Senior Director for Policy and Federal Government Affairs. Stuart, I think you captured it very nicely. I think that when we're looking at increasing the research dollars, it's just so important for federal legislators and everyone to understand the breadth of things that are looked at, whether it's a lot of the biological related research that was discussed, to transition related research, to ensuring that we're doing everything we can to support adults on the spectrum as well. There's a continuum, and there's a huge need that needs to be fulfilled. And so I think the more that we can emphasize how important it is to everyone's daily lives, the more successful we'll be.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Dave. Let's see, we've got a shout out to Musina for sort of keeping it real about the personal effects during this time on the family, and a question that might be best for you. Any insight if colleges are interested in opening up spaces to kids on the spectrum, looking at different kinds of assessment systems, since that can be a barrier for some kids?
So I have been a real mouthpiece when it comes to, I know for at Morehouse and at the Atlanta University Center, because there's 3 schools there, Clark Atlanta University, Spelman College, and Morehouse College, and they're all in this consortium. And so I've been really vocal about, hey, we need to do more to help our students, not just the students who are here, but those that are in our surrounding communities, because they're not any identified resources for those who are on the spectrum, or even with the other disabilities, learning disabilities on campus, that are really helpful. And there aren't also tools to help students self-advocate. So they come to college and they're used to their parents and other medical advocates, speaking on their behalf. And when they come to school, they have a challenge with transitioning, because they don't know how to self-advocate. They don't know how to get the services that they need, and that they are able to evoke their rights. By the time they understand that they need to speak up for themselves, they are angry. And so it takes a different tone. And so I have been really that kind of person is trying to bridge the gap between what our students should know about being a college student. Just kind of Angelica, like how you were saying your son didn't know how to even engage. They don't even know what questions to ask. And so it's important to kind of have that open forum for them to be able to explain some of their challenges in a setting where there's no pressure to do so, but where they know that they have someone fighting on their team for them, so that they can get the things that they need. Is that kind of what you were asking?
I think that's right. I think that was a good response. Thank you. Last question, Stuart. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're almost at time, so maybe one last question. Actually, we're a little beyond time, but we'll try to answer all the questions. May take us a little while, but we'll try to answer all the questions. So please ask the last question.
Okay, we'll do last question, and then we'll try to get responses to those for whom we have email afterwards if we don't get to your question. This one, there may be an element for Angelica and an element for Tom. It was, I think, in regards to the system of assessing prevalence. When do you plan on expanding to rural areas? I suspect the 1 in 54 is not representative. Those in rural communities face more challenges to get the diagnosis. And then there was a part of that question that had to deal with the prevalence leaving out Asians and Native Americans. And I think Tom answered that online, but I'll let him mention that for the larger group that may not have seen that in the chat as well. And that was from Theo.
Yeah, so there definitely is. I agree. I think there is going to be a difference between what we're seeing for prevalence in rural and urban communities. The surveillance area for 2008 was in our kind of the application for CDC, and the requirement was it had to be 4 continuous counties, and so we wanted to replicate kind of what we've done since 2002, and so we were only supposed to do 4. We expanded to 8 to kind of I guess compromise a little bit. Maureen Durkin, who's the PI for the WSATS team at the Weizmann Center, wants to remain as consistent as she can with the surveillance area. When we will expand, I don't know. We do have some meetings coming up with other professionals at the university that are looking into machine learning, and she's always trying to explore ways on how we can expand our surveillance to the entire state. So I don't have a for sure answer on when we would expand to rural areas. And then I would agree with Dr. Frazier on what he said for Asian and Native American communities. Our N is just not big enough. The snapshots that we do talk about are the ones that kind of stick out compared to the rest of the data.
Great, thank you, Angelica.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks everyone for joining. We're at 4:34. We've been on for about an hour and a half. I think we could probably go on for another hour, but I think we should respect everyone's time and try to stay close to the limits. As I said, we will try to answer questions, and I want to remind everyone again about the upcoming events. Allie, they can find out about the events on our advocacy page, correct?
Yeah, all of the events will be on the Autism Speaks and the Autism Speaks advocacy Facebook page. So they'll be constantly updated. Also, we've been talking about COVID. If you haven't already accessed it, there's a resource center on the Autism Speaks website, and a lot of these events and updated resources are being posted there nearly on a daily basis. So be sure to keep an eye on that as well as you move on with your week.
So thanks again to all of our panelists, and thank you. Thanks to everyone who's attending this program, and we'll be back in touch soon, and we're always here to answer your questions and move the community forward. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity. Take care. Be well.